Hello there, welcome to the map screen, where we take a look at the design and function of maps and video games through a cartographic lens. In this episode, we'll be looking at Dungeons of Hinterberg, released in 2024 for PC and Xbox and developed by Microbird Games. The game is a bit of an action-adventure, role-playing, dungeon crawler mashup, but might also be described as what if Zelda but cozy vacation in the Alps? The basic premise being that inexplicably, magical dungeons appear in a small Austrian town, and the town decides to capitalize on their luck by becoming a role-playing tourist trap. Players flock to the area for a slaycation and seek to blow some steam by completing the 25 dungeons and marking them off in a little stamp book, like a national park. In addition to puzzles, exploration, and hack-and-slash combat, the game features a social sim component, similar to something like you'd see in Persona, where items, upgrades, and abilities are acquired by spending time with NPCs in between the dungeon dives. The game's world is broken up into 5 major areas. There's the alpine peaks and valleys of Doberkogel, the forests and gorges of Hinterwald, the snowy slopes and glaciers of Kolmstein, the watery lowlands of Brunelsum, and the titular town that ties it all together, Hinterberg. Each of these areas comes with its own map, helping to guide players between the various dungeons and points of interest scattered throughout them. The look of these maps doesn't quite align with the look of the game, which uses a cel-shaded comic book aesthetic complete with half-tone textures for light and shadows. Instead, the maps use the style of what in the real world would be called multi-directional shaded relief, or hillshade. This is one of many ways cartographers can depict elevation and terrain in maps, where instead of using a single light source to cast shadows, there are multiple light sources placed in different positions to illuminate things from multiple angles. This creates more ambient lighting and helps preserve visible detail on the backside of slopes and within deep valleys and chasms. The fact that these maps also accurately plot out each and every tree suggests these maps might be derived from the game data itself, and that the relief may have been produced with the same algorithms that real-world map makers use. Just instead of plugging in a real-world digital elevation model, they plugged in a height map from the level. This isn't something you always see, as a lot of games seem to use maps hand-drawn by artists which try to approximate the level design, but don't entirely align with it, which can make navigation a little more tricky. It's the difference between looking at an illustrated map of a city versus, say, something like Google Maps satellite view. The maps and dungeons of Hinterberg also employ the use of hypsometric tinting, where subtle changes in color help to highlight the elevation. Here, darker, cooler colors define the lower valleys and ravines, while brighter, warmer colors show the higher peaks and plateaus that are closest to the reader's point of view. Being set in the Alps, it does feel like a tiny missed opportunity not to style the maps in a way that evoke the well-known Swiss topo maps, which are pretty iconic in the world of cartography and are some of the best reference maps you can find today. But I suppose this is supposed to be Austria and not Switzerland. The maps also feature icons for points of interest that are fairly clear and self-explanatory. Dungeon entrances, which appear as plasmic doorways in the game world, are shown with matching door symbols on the map and gain a little checkmark to show when they've been completed. Fast travel points combine the sort of common "you are here" type map pin merged with a rotated fast forward symbol, which is a nice touch to reflect that those are places you can quickly skip ahead to. There's also shopping carts for stores, a little goat man to represent gatherings of an in-game monster fan club, as well as a tiny yoga person to mark meditation points, where players can pass in-game time and boost their stats. There are also unique icons for each NPC whom the player can potentially befriend, which resemble the character and make them quick and easy to find, given that they tend to move around a bunch on the map. The fictional town of Hinterberg is inspired by real-world towns like Hallstatt or St. Gilgen, lakeside towns nestled deep in the mountains with lots of charm and tourist appeal. While the town is shown on a single map, it is divided into smaller playable areas, unlike the larger backcountry regions. The connections between these sections are marked on the map with arrows and flow lines, visualizing the fast travel paths between them. The map helps clarify how these places should hypothetically fit together, even when they are technically entirely disconnected play spaces. Given that many, if not most, players will use the fast travel option between these spaces, the connecting arrows are largely just there for immersion and defining the sense of place. In addition to the more passive features of the maps, there's also a marker system that lets players place their own pins and icons. This feature is becoming more and more common in games, seen in titles like The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild, Elden Ring, and Metroid Dread, just to name a few, and there are certainly much older games which have done something similar. In games where players have to rely heavily on a map to navigate, letting the player mark up the map within the game, instead of relying on paper and pen or a good memory, can be a huge quality of life improvement. In Dungeons of Hinterberg, it's maybe a little bit overkill given the smaller map size, the limited need to backtrack, and the generous placement of fast travel points, but it's there if you want it and can be helpful for marking the location of locked treasure chests or groups of high-level monsters you may want to return to. Lastly, the player unlocks fast travel points by locating map boards throughout the world, which are housed in the kind of little kiosks you've likely seen at trailheads or tourist attractions. Unfortunately, they all feature the same exact map graphic, rather than one unique to each area, which would have been a neat touch. But it's a fun idea for a fast travel marker and helps cement that tourist destination feel. So, what do you think of all the maps in Dungeons of Hinterberg? Do you find the map pin feature useful in games? Let me know in the comments, and thank you for watching.